What was a pilum? A spoken history series. The pilum long with a pyramidal head. The shank was joined to the wooden shaft by either a socket or a flat tang. A pilum had a total weight of between 2 and 5 pounds, with the versions produced during the earlier Republic being slightly heavier than those produced in the later Empire. The weapon had a hard pyramidal tip, but the shank was sometimes made of softer iron. The softness could cause the shank to bend after impact and so render the weapon useless to the enemy. Some believe that the pilum was not meant to bend after impact, but that bending came from improper handling / removal of the weapon when it became stuck in an object. If a pilum struck a shield, it might embed itself. The bending of the shank would force the enemy to discard his shield as unusable without removing the pilum, which would be time-consuming. Even if the shank did not bend, the pyramidal tip still made it difficult to pull out. However, there were many cases in which the whole shank was hardened, making the pilum more suitable as a close-quarters melee weapon and also making it usable by enemy soldiers. Although the bending of its shank is commonly seen as an integral part of the weapon's design and as an intentional feature, there is little evidence to suggest that. The most commonly found artifacts suggest that the pilum was constructed to use the weight of the weapon to cause damage, most likely to be able to impale through armor and reach the enemy soldier's body. The combination of the weapon's weight and the aforementioned pyramidal tip, the earliest known examples of the heavy version of the pilum have barbed heads and their tangs have a figure-8 shape. Romans also used the pilum as a melee weapon in close-quarters combat. Note pictorial depictions from the Tripium Training Monument, descriptions of Caesar's troops using javelins as pikes against the Gauls in Caesar's Gallic War, Book 7, and descriptions of Caesar's men using javelins to stab at Pompey's cavalry in Plutarch's Life of Caesar. The angon was a similar weapon used in late Roman and post-Roman times. The origin of the design of the pilum is a matter of contention. Arguments have been proposed which suggest that the design stemmed from ancient Italian tribes or from the Iberian Peninsula. Considering that there are two versions of the pilum, the Roman pilum may be descended two different weapons, perhaps from different cultural groups. The two weapon designs may have coalesced into the form of the typical Roman pilum as it is known today. Legionaries of the late Republic and early Empire often carried two pila, with one sometimes being lighter than the other. Standard tactics called for Roman soldiers to throw one of them at the enemy, just before charging to engage with the gladius. However, Alexander Zachmatikov has argued that the Roman infantry could use pila at any stage in the fighting. The effect of the pilum throw was to disrupt the enemy formation by attrition and by causing gaps to appear in any protective shield wall. The design of the pilum's tip is such that once wedged inside a shield, it is difficult to remove. A shield thus penetrated by a pilum became very awkward to wield, and was usually discarded. This resulted in the aforementioned gaps in the protective shield wall, which could then favor the short gladius in tight hand-to-hand melee. Pila could also be used in hand-to-hand combat. One documented instance of this occurred at the Siege of Alesia, and another during Mark Antony's Parthian campaign. Additionally, pila could be employed as a thrusting implement and a barrier against cavalry charges. Some pila had small handguards to protect the wielder if he intended to use it as a melee weapon, but it does not appear that this was common. The Roman writer Vegetius, in his work De Re Militari, wrote, "As to the missile weapons of the infantry, they were javelins headed with a triangular sharp iron, 11 inches 279 millimeters, or a foot long, and were called piles. When once fixed in the shield, it was impossible to draw them out, and when thrown with force and skill, they penetrated the cuirass without difficulty." And later in the same work, they had likewise two other javelins, the largest of which was composed of a staff 5 feet and a half long and a triangular head of iron 9 inches, 230 millimeters, long. This was formerly called the pilum, but now it is known by the name of spiculum. The soldiers were particularly exercised in the use of this weapon, because when thrown with force and skill it often penetrated the shields of the foot and the cuirasses of the horse. It may be argued that a short iron shaft has very few confirmations from archaeology. Vegetius wrote about a 1-foot iron shaft because at Vegetius' time the pilum had disappeared and been replaced by similar shorter weapons such as the plumbati and the spiculum. Thanks in part to experimental archaeology, it is generally believed that the design of the pilum evolved to be armor-piercing. The pyramidal head would punch a small hole through an enemy's shield, allowing the thin shank to pass through and penetrate far enough to wound the man behind it. The thick wooden shaft provided the weight behind the punch. In one description, one of the 2 iron nails that held the iron shaft in place was replaced with a weak wooden pin that would break on impact, causing the shaft to twist sideways. Gaius Marius is sometimes given credit for that modification. Thank you for listening to this episode. If you are interested in similar content, please subscribe and check out one of our playlists.